Hi all. Right, okay. There was a brief interlude there. It's not a surprise. Right, let's get into the show. This is the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show, and this is the show that brings information past the year of 2014. And there will be a point in tonight's show, which is fairly packed. There's about 14 op-ed pieces tonight, so quite a bit to cover. But there'll be a point in tonight's show where members will shake their heads and go seriously, Wells the Fargo, followed by shaking their heads again and further rounds of Wells the Fargo. And for those who are new, Wells the Fargo means what the... This being the last week in September, that makes it 10 months and counting now. The opening song, if I played that when I first put out about the Two Worlds piece and gave a heads up to all that listened back in 2015, it wouldn't have made as much sense as it does now, as people struggled to get their heads around that concept. And I warned it would become more visible as time moved on. And it has, people are seeing it now. Well, we've survived another week away from Loop news and programmes as we get more true to ourselves in our world and stand our ground, all transparent for all to see. But THI, along with Off Planet Radio and Circle of White Light, are fast becoming islands. You've all noticed it, as the dance of the two worlds ups the ante. Two worlds collided briefly in 2017 and has got wider ever since. Right, we're going to go into some the usual format of the news, some Q&A, some sub-intel, some very interesting intel, and about 14 op-ed pieces. So let's get into it and see how far we go. Just check on the sound. Yep, okay. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is under fire, and he said he cannot remember how often he wore the blackface as a younger man, which has caused a bit of a scandal. And he was speaking after more images of him wearing black makeup when he was younger emerged. And he said, "I'm wary of being definitive about this because of the recent pictures that came out. I had not remembered," he told reporters in Winnipeg this week. And the revelations have rattled his campaign in what is becoming a fairly tight election race, which from all accounts includes two people who I have had on my show, Kevin Annett and Tanath, believe it or not. No, I won't be giving her name out. And Canadians will be going to the polls on the 21st of October. Now, the video came to light on Thursday, which is, it always comes to light in election time. Funny they never post this at any other time, which he is seen in a white t-shirt, torn jeans, and his face and limbs covered in black makeup. Now, the footage, which was shot not last week or the week before, but back in the 1990s, he is seen as laughing, heaven forbid, throwing his hands in the air, sticking his tongue out and pulling faces. Mr. Trudeau would have been in his late teens or early 20s at the time. Now, blackface, which is more prevalent in the past, particularly in the entertainment industry, involves white people painting their faces darker and is widely condemned now as racist caricature. We'll have more on that later. Thousands of people are protesting across the UK currently, with pupils leaving schools and workers down in tools as part of a global climate strike day. and millions are taking part around the world with rallies in British cities including Glasgow, Manchester and London, urging climate justice. Students set off alarm bells at 1 o'clock British Standard Time to raise the alarm for the climate, and Energy Minister Kwasi Kwarteng said their voices were being heard. However, he said he could not endorse children leaving school to take part. Jake Woodier, campaign coordinator in UK Student Climate Network, said, "We understand it's simply not feasible for many employees to take a day off to participate in a strike, but that doesn't mean to say they can't have a voice." Now, demonstrations were also organised in Cardiff, Edinburgh, Brighton, Newcastle, Bournemouth, and Birmingham. And Sebastian, a pupil from John Stainer Community School in Brockley, South East London, said he joined the protest to help fight global warming. We'll have more than that later. Much more. Thomas Cook, which is fairly high-level tour operator in the UK. When I wrote this, I admitted on that it's facing a huge funding black hole, and shareholders have been warned there is a significant risk of no recovery. Now, the 178-year-old travel firm is facing a £200 million black hole and could go bust as early as the weekend. And they were hit with a demand for extra funds, and a panel of bankers have delayed a decision that could have won over investors. This morning, the company said it was speaking to stakeholders to bridge the funding gap. However, it said the fundraiser is expected to significantly dilute existing shareholders' stakes in the firm, with significant risk of no recovery. Now, what it did mean, which is also typical, is the people miss out. And the holiday plans for thousands of Brits could be in jeopardy, and 180,000 customers may end up stranded abroad. Now, if Thomas Cook does collapse, package holidays are ATOL protected, meaning holidaymakers could not face any extra cost, and there would be refunds for planned holidays that don't happen. Yeah, right. That would leave the taxpayer, the people paying again, facing a bill of around £600 million, which equates ballpark to $750 million, to get the people home. Now, people who just bought flights through the firm would not be protected, only if you bought a vacation package. Unbelievable. And the bank issuing the payments demands on Thomas Cook is Royal Bank of Scotland. For the American listeners who are not updated on that, Royal Bank of Scotland were the bank who famously went bust in 2008. But unlike Thomas Cook, they received bailout payments from the Federal Reserve to refloat them, none of which has been repaid. Part of a $15 trillion package in February of 2009 that the Fed sent to mainly UK banks but also EU, and none of it's been repaid. Imagine if we asked for the 15 trillion back, and then America would only owe 7 trillion in their world. In our world, there is no $22 trillion debt. It's all been paid off. Now, by Sunday, the news broke through that Thomas Cook had collapsed after last-minute negotiations aimed at saving the holiday firm failed, and Peter Fankhauser, Thomas Cook's chief executive, said the firm's collapse was a matter of profound regret, and it also triggered the biggest ever peacetime repatriation aimed at bringing more than 150,000 British holidaymakers home. The tour operator's failure now puts 22,000 jobs at risk, including 9,000 in the UK. Yemen, another one who have been Houthi rebels who have been on strike, announced a halt to strikes against Saudi Arabia, adding that they expect reciprocal steps from Riyadh. And the ceasefire offer comes days after a major attack on Saudi oil refineries claimed by the Houthis. Now, the televised announcement was made on Friday by Mahdi al-Mashat, the head of the Houthi political council in Sana'a, and it comes as the Saudi-led coalition launched a massive operation against legitimate military targets, it said, north of the port of Hodeidah, which is in southwestern Yemen. And he said, I call on all parties from different sides of the war to engage seriously in genuine negotiations that can lead to a comprehensive national reconciliation that does not exclude anyone, said Mashat. Well, of course, we covered that extensively of what actually took place and why it took place in the intel last week. And it said if the Saudis ignore the ceasefire offer and continue bombing, the group reserves its right to respond. United Nations coming under fire, not just by puppet kids either. This week it's been urged by more than 1,000 of its employees to reduce its own carbon footprint by cutting down on perks. This reminds me of, Google and Microsoft and Amazon, their staff complaining about actions of their company. So it's good to hear, it is getting around the world. And they're requesting that they cut down on perks such as business class flights and travel allowances. And staff members are calling on the organisation to take a leaf out of its own climate change manual and make changes to address the group's carbon footprint. And this letter was sent and addressed to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Our commitments need to be more ambitious, at least as concrete as those of the UN member states and non-party stakeholders attending the UN Climate Action Summit, according to the letter, by a group called Young UN. And more than 40,000 people are employed by the UN across 60 countries, which together contribute to a staggering carbon footprint that is greater than several of its member states. In 2017, its own data showed the organisation emitted 1.86 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. Yeah, ban the UN. Then we don't have to listen to children talking out of the wrong end of their vessel. US President Donald Trump got played with misinformation by Israeli officials, including PM Benjamin Netanyahu, who take liberties with the truth if it would sway the US, was the statement made this week by ex-Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and the embattled Israeli leader he described as an extraordinarily skilled politician, but a bit Machiavellian. And Tillerson told an audience this week at Harvard in a private panel discussion, he said, in dealing with Bibi, it's always useful to carry a healthy amount of scepticism in your discussions with him. And he didn't end there. Netanyahu and other Israeli officials would share misinformation if they thought it would persuade the US of something. And they did that with the president on a couple of occasions to persuade him that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. I welcome Mr. Tillerson saying that, because we on this show have said it for a long time. One wonders what happens next. And he said, we later exposed it to the president so he understood you have been played. It bothers me that an ally, that's a laugh, that's that close and important to us would do that to us. Yeah, remember 1967, that's what allies do. And Tillerson lamented that he was shoved out of the way regarding Middle East policy so that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, could draft the Israeli-Palestinian peace plan, and the unveiling of which may be postponed yet again, as Netanyahu seemingly failed to secure another term as PM. Yes, he lost the votes, but they're now still pushing them forward, and all it proves is that voting counts for nothing, does it not? So kudos to Mr. Tillerson for telling the truth and also working it out, because there's many who can't. Where are we going next? Pharmaceuticals. Torrent Pharmaceuticals is expanding a recall of blood pressure medication possibly tainted with cancer-causing chemicals. And the expansion is the fifth by Torrent, involving widely used Losartan potassium tablets, which are sold nationwide, Losartan. And regulators first moved to pull heart drugs with potentially deadly contaminants from store shelves last year. Now, the contaminant behind the latest Torrent recall is also the same one that prompted Novartis to halt distribution of generic versions of the popular heartburn drug Zantac. Oops. And Torrent on Thursday said it was recalling an additional 5 lots of medication used to treat hypertension after the discovery in the tablets of a chemical called NMBA. And no, I'm not pronouncing it. Nitrosamethylamidobutyric acid, whatever that means. Either way, it causes cancer. This next piece could possibly have sinister motives behind it. I haven't had a chance to check into deeper details of it, but this particular story, I smell a rat. 13 Marines have been formally charged with playing a role in the smuggling of undocumented immigrants into the US, according to the Marine Corps announced last Friday. In addition to the smuggling charges, the Marines will face military court proceedings for charges including failure to obey an order, drunkenness, endangerment, larceny and perjury, according to the statement from the 1st Marine Division press office. Now, 2 of the Marines were specifically named, Lance Corporal Byron Law and David Salazar Quintero, but the other names were withheld. And these 2 have also been charged federally with transporting and conspiring to transport illegal immigrants into the country for financial gain. Both of them were based at Camp Pendleton in California. The Epstein story rolls on, and those Blue Dragon clans in the UK are now expressing concerns. MI6 fears Russia could have damaging information about Prince Andrew's alleged relationship with one of Jeffrey Epstein's underage sex slaves. after a sheriff with access to the investigation moved to Moscow. Smart move. And the British intelligence agency reportedly thinks that they have embarrassing information about the royals' relationship with Virginia Roberts Giuffre. And the newspaper quotes a security source who claims that the British spies fear that Russia may have obtained dirt on Prince Andrew from a former Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputy. Now, the ex-deputy John Mark Dougan is an American who sought asylum in Moscow in 2016. Dougan, who also served in the United States Marine Corps, worked for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office in 2005. And the same year, it started its investigation into Epstein. Now, the 36-year-old alleges she was coerced by pedophile US businessman Jerry Epstein, who is a friend of Prince Andrew, into having sex with Andrew on 3 occasions. And she said, "I know their faces and I know what they've done to me." The US military has apologised this week for a since-deleted tweet that threatened to attack millennial raiders, as they called them, in Area 51 with a stealth bomber. Really. The Defence Visual Information Distribution Service, jokingly it says, taunted the UFO fans that gathered at Area 51 military base in Nevada to storm the base rumoured to house government secrets about aliens on Friday, alluding that they would be confronted with a B-2 stealth bomber. And it said the last thing #millennials will see if they attempt to raid Area 51. And they posted a picture of the B-2 bomber and said it was a joke. Yeah, right. And they also had a group of soldiers standing in front of the bomber, but the tweet that joked about violence against the alien fanatics arriving at the base's gate fell foul with the crowd, forcing the military to apologise. And one of the officials' employees posted a tweet saying that in no way supports the stance of the Department of Defence. It was inappropriate and we apologise for this mistake. Well, who did it and why? It's not the puppets who pressed enter or send. That's gone from higher up, in my opinion. A couple of more news pieces before we get into some Q&A. Nigeria lost 1.35 billion to oil theft in the first 6 months of this year. We all know the backstory to that. And said it needs a legal task force with special courts to tackle it. And the committee set up to investigate theft from miles of pipelines that snake through the country's swampy, oil-rich delta region said the theft will only grow if the government does not take special action to combat it. What if the government is involved in it? Oops. In addition to a legal task force with dedicated courts, prosecution teams and specially trained judges, it also said oil pipeline maintenance and ownership need to be restructured. Now, the governance structure of the pipelines is such today that no one is held accountable. Yeah, that's how it works when these losses occur. And the committee, chaired by Edo State Governor Godwin Obaseki, said in the report, the 4 primary pipelines lost 22.5 million barrels of oil in the first 6 months, which is roughly 6% of Nigeria's nearly 2 million barrels per day. And the committee also cited a lack of fuel stations in most of the oil-producing communities around the Niger Delta, which it said made them resort to oil theft and illegal refining. And the recommendations will go to the President, Mr. Buhari, who controls the country's petroleum portfolio. Like I said, they're all involved in it. They're all getting a little cut, like what happened in Iraq. Same in Nigeria, same in Saudi. Children, last news item. Children as young as 6 are being taught about touching or stimulating their own genitals as part of classes that will become compulsory in hundreds of primary schools in the UK. Some parents believe the lessons, part of a controversial new sex and relationships teaching programme called All About Me, are sexualising their young children. All About Me is being rolled out across 241 primaries in Warwickshire County Council and could be adapted by other local authorities next year as part of the government's overhaul of relationship and sex education. The council bought Spring Fever, which is a Dutch sex education programme for 4-year-olds to 11-year-olds, which provided the blueprint from which they helped develop the All About Me lesson plans. More about that later. Q&A. The social programmes now in place, SSI, food stamps, educations, are funded from the Trust and being paid today. Could you tell us whether the State's Secretary of Treasury or the Federal Secretary of Treasury gets that money first? I'm not aware of the Treasury being involved. I don't know too much about that information, but there is a fund for it. That is what I do know. Whether the Treasury are involved in it, I don't know. This time of the year is called Indian Summer. You said in the last THI that we're entering into another big sacrifice harvesting period for the ancestors of the Kali Ma folks from India. A little curiosity here. The first song that the CIA band The Doors, with Jim Morrison nicknamed the Lizard King, which is Pindar, ever recorded was the song Indian Summer. Should Indian Summer be read as Kali Ma harvesting summer? It's good thinking. We all know, and I know you in particular are fairly good on word magic, the person who asked the question. There's a lot of it about, but is it summer or is it summer? You know, I kind of checked up on it, and there's no reference to it. And I tell you what, there's no reference to where the word autumn came from. There is no pi root. They have no idea where it came from. But yes, that is September, October is the harvest moon. And yes, it said about harvesting crops, which is correct in some regions. But it's also there mass rituals of harvesting humans. Coincidence? Maybe not. Like the Lord of One and Ra and the harvest. Yeah. It's not harvesting crops. It was about harvesting humans. And I don't care which show publishes that rubbish. We're not buying into it. As a side thing, while we're talking about words and Indian, the term Red Indian only came in 1831, and it was to distinguish American Indians and the people of India. Oops. As the From Russia with Love series, which has a new edition sometime between Saturday and next Tuesday. The term Indian came from that country and mixed with the natives. So perhaps the land bridge was there a lot earlier than we thought. Is there anywhere that you know of that I can contact someone who might have information with regards to curriculum that might be used in schooling or homeschooling of people who still follow the way of the Rus? I imagine most of it kept private for fear of being targeted, and it would be great to work off of those existing curriculums and bring it to the West. If not, I may just contact website and YouTube channel owners who talk about the Rus. They won't know. I'm not too sure there is an education or a teaching curriculum of the Rus. You know, we used to have what was known as general trivia back in the 1400s. Maths, English, or your own native language, and geometry was taught, and the top subject was astronomy. And for some reason I knew all this when I was 13 and spoke the whole curriculum out when I was challenged by a half-wit teacher. You know, and he kind of mocked at me mentioning astronomy as the top subject, but it included maths, which very few liked, chemistry, physics and biology, as it was called back then, which is science. And it, of course, it encompasses many other things to do with science in a discipline that has a lot of interest. You know, particularly at that time when we were talking about Apollo and the moon missions and the shuttle was being built then. You know, a lot of kids had an interest in space, not just in America, but in Europe also. And that was the head subject in the 14th century until the Catholic Church closed it down. And then we were taught shite. What I do know is following parts 1 and 2 of From Russia with Love, I'm mentioning the Rus and its history. Putin did issue an executive order whereby Rus would be taught in Russian schools again. So maybe some of the elders in Russia may come forward, who knows, I hope so, with some of the more ancient knowledge. You may have answered similar questions in the past, but since everything is in flux, do you and or Kim foresee a change in market conditions where the prices of land and real estate in general will adjust to reasonable market values, and those of us without homes and lands will be able to enter the market? I would like to think so. There's no guarantee as it stands. You know, part of the project I did start to work on was the village, which would have changes that would be wide-ranging, that are related to your question. Maybe one day I'll do a show on it. You know, it's not just about building a village for like-minded people. It involved maybe 10 or 12 disciplines that would change how life operates, works, or and it would certainly cut down on a lot of the skullduggery to do with finances. So it was a complete project. Can organic soul parents have kids with non-organic? I think I've answered this several times. I cover all this in Humanity Unplugged 1 and 2. That would be the best to go and listen to gain an understanding. Can humans have non-human kids? Yes. Why? Because the soul enters at the point of birth. Like I said, go and listen to Humanity Unplugged 1 and 2. It covers that rather well and in far more detail. When and where did humans first appear? I don't think many can answer that. The Arya means first man. So that would suggest that the Rus were here first, certainly to do with the white race. And then you've got several stories of the black race being here a long time, and then you've got the Aboriginals in Australia and New Zealand thinking that they were the first. Who knows? You know, at the end of the day is, what are they doing now? Who was first and who was last makes no difference really. You know, it's what we do now that counts. What is the true origin of English language? Largely Latin. Although it's a mixture of, there's Scandinavian, there's a mixture of Rus in it, and then as time, certainly in the past 1,000 years, or certainly over the last 600 years, when something shifted drastically in the 14th century onwards, the whole thing of language has been messed up again. But it's not the first time it was messed up either. The Lord came down and changed the languages, told you, in one of their fake books. I would like suggestions of alternative methods for receiving monthly social security checks and bill paying without a bank account. So would we. Perhaps you can help us. When we are planning to create a new paradigm, do we plan for a major breakdown of society, like a Katrina type situation where helicopters are needed to drop food and water? No. Everything is being done to avoid that, which is why the banks are giving the illusion they're still going. That is not a consideration. When we're talking about plans, it's what are we going to do to change the existing platform? You know, for example, take houses. Have houses and their cost work for us? Well, clearly not. So how can you change that going forward? You know, two of the things that are part of the village I've just mentioned is tiny homes. One half of the village will be tiny homes, and one your basic 3-bed, 2-bath, which would you know, be enough for most families. We need to get away from the status symbol of homes and because we're paying heavily for that cost. And part of the things in the village would be the homes would be roughly ballpark the cost to build plus 10 to 15%. That's it. It doesn't go up and it doesn't go down. So the home then is not at the whim of the inflation rate as such, although technically it would go up with the inflation rate. But what it will stop is the boom and bust, because the home price would stay the same, plus the annual rise or fall of the inflation rate, so that the homeowner is not losing value. A home that cost $100,000 to build should not be sold for 400, 500, 600, 700,000. All that's doing is filling the banks. And yes, we've bought into it as a status symbol. I've got a $500,000 home in blah blah. We have to stop that. A home is a home. And one of the other things I would like to see in the future is young adults starting off must go into a tiny home. So we're not throwing them onto the home's debt cycle wheel at such an early age. You got kids 19, 20, 21, just got married and buying houses for $300,000. That's burdening the child for the status symbol. It hasn't worked. And one of the primary reasons for divorce is down to finance. So how about new couples spend 3, 4 or 5 years in a tiny home that they can afford, and they can build up their nest egg to then go on to what you would class as the normal homes. It's far better than throwing kids into $250,000 and above homes, but all the paychecks are going out paying for a status symbol, because that's all it is. It no longer becomes a home. So I hope that answer helps. We have to look at what we've got now and how we can improve it. Some people would like to talk about the education system, which means training of animals, into a teaching system. Come up with new curriculums, and maybe it can get funded going forward. It's all about what we have now. Does it work? No. In fact, most things don't work. And what can we do that's going to improve it, that's going to help the all? Well, there's the two examples, the tiny homes and all homes built in the village would be builder's cost plus 10 or 15%, and that's it. That then cuts out the bankers. Can you tell us anything about Russell J. Gould? Oh, not again. That guy has been around for the whole of this century. He's been Postmaster General of the World, and this title and that title, and Commander-in-Chief, and all kinds of other things for the past 20 years, and has achieved what? Nothing. He's and his sidekick, David Wynne Miller, the Parsi grammar people, all kinds of words, and let's go into courts. But what have they done in 20 years? Nothing. This is the same as Anna von Reitz and the other fella, Alfred Weber, self-appointed judges. But what have they achieved? Nothing. I think. And that won't change either, because all those titles are fake. How are we for time? In the last show, or recent show, you mentioned the Secret World Council and how they voted 4-3 in favour of our plan. Can you expand on this council? I did. I mentioned them quite extensively maybe 6 weeks ago. What does this vote mean moving forward? Well, it's a big shift, because 2 years ago, that would have been, or even a year ago, that vote would have been 0-7. And it shows a shift in some groups, not all, of whatever they have tried has failed, which, had they listened to this show, or certainly this show host back in 2013, they were warned all their plans will fail. And they have. The only thing they've achieved is blocking the funds coming out. That's it. But they're not only blocking our funds, they have none. And so somewhere along the line, the impasse has to end. And the ball is in their court, not ours. We can sit and wait. We don't have to. Kim doesn't have to give any funds out of the trust. None. But they need funds more than we do, because they've got wolves at the door demanding payments on their fake currencies that they've been handing out like confetti for the last 3 or 4 years, on the promise that an RV was coming. Regurgitated vomit. That's all that is. Have you heard of the concept of ABC Friends? This is used to raise children. A, friends are trusted to leave the house with your child unchaperoned. B, friends need to come to your child's house chaperoned. C, friends want you to see friends you do not want around your child and them run away. C is around you. In the world of materialistic takers, this works well for adults who are empath givers with integrity to stop the insanity of being used over and over again. It works on a certain level, yeah. I would suggest more of our members and listeners are now learning to tune into the frequencies, and so those types of programs are no longer needed. I've heard of a secret court inside the White House, and it's not the FISA court. This unknown court writes its known rules and regulations and is above Trump. Do you have knowledge of this court? No. Awful lot of ex-CIA and ex-this, ex-NSA and ex-FBI spouting an awful lot of shit on the internet at the moment, to put it bluntly. I read Svetlana's book Revelation Childhood. In her book, Isadora talks with Seva about revealing the truth about Radomir, and Seva tells her that humanity is not ready. Do you believe that humanity is ready now that Svetlana reveals this in her book? No. No. Humanity's just not ready. Oh, what if they find out there was a real Jesus, but his name was Radomir and he was Russian? Oops. You know, the whole of the Western world is told that fear Russia, they're all vodka drinking communists. The point being is, although the series From Russia with Love has been received rather well, some people don't like it. They just don't like it. It's exposing religion for what it is, and it's exposing the deeper elements of darkness also. So if some of the awake can't handle it, then the rest of them have no chance. And I don't think the world's ready to be told that there was teachers here to help them in the past. There's some here now. But do they listen? Like Cassandra says, there are elements among you that even when they speak the truth, they're ridiculed, slandered, killed, etc., etc. And you can't argue with that. Even the narrative of Jesus, whether you believe in Jesus or not, what did the people do to save him on the cross? Nothing. They stood there and watched the Son of God, and they stand there and watch. So even whether you believe that story or not, the point of it is, if Jesus was around 2,000 years ago, and he was the Son of God, and you had all these religious people, why did they stand around and let the Son of God die on the cross and be tortured? Is it any different now? Not really. It's more people aware of what's gone on. But how many are prepared to take that knowledge and push it into actions? Are the writings of the Cathars stolen by the Roman Catholic Church during the Inquisition still under or in the Vatican? I don't know. There's enough about the Cathars in the Levashov books, not just Svetlana's, but her husband also, Nikolai. So there's obviously somewhere in Russia the writings of the Cathars, and not in the Roman Catholic Church, despite the cult of Ra and the Bolshevik clowns taking over that country. Right, we're going to have a short break, and this is kind of a topical song. It was mentioned recently, and so I'm going to play it back, and we'll be back with some sub-intel and intel after this. Hi all and welcome back. Sub-intel. As warned in recent shows about the vaping, Walmart stepped out last Friday and said it will stop selling electronic cigarettes at its namesake stores, and Sam's Club following a string of alleged mysterious illnesses and deaths that are now related to vaping. Told you what was coming next. They're going to ban the whole lot of it. The nation's largest retailer, which is based in Bentonville, Arkansas, said that it will complete its exit from e-cigarettes after selling through its current inventory. They make sure they get their own money back first. If they're that really interested in people's health, they would ban it straight away. No, they're going to carry on selling it first. So, obviously it's not a health concern, is it? Because if it's such a health concern, it would go off the shelves today, not after they sold the current inventory. Shut that back door. The move is due to growing federal, state and local regulatory complexity, it says, regarding vaping products. And the company said in a statement, President Donald Trump has proposed a federal ban on flavoured e-cigarettes and vaping products. No surprise. Following what was mentioned about Belize, and you already know what's going on in Venezuela and several other Central American countries, the government of Guatemala this week has declared a state of emergency that temporarily suspends some rights in parts of the country's north after it is alleged suspected drug traffickers killed 3 members of a military patrol. Fairly radical and over the top there. And the state of emergency will be applied in various townships in the provinces of Izabal, Zacapa, El Progreso, Petén and Alta Verapaz, and the decree suspends for 30 days the rights of assembly, transit, the right to carry arms and constitutional guarantees against arrest without a warrant. That sounds like a coup to me. And Guatemala's president said Wednesday that drug traffickers were behind the violence. So 3 people get killed and about 7 provinces lose all their rights. That makes sense? No, me either. Now, the military unit had been tracking an apparent drug flight from the ground when it was attacked. This will come up in a future show, and but it shows further warnings that we've put in previously, and who is involved in it as well. But at least a dozen Iranian students who are set to begin graduate programs in engineering and computer science say their visas were abruptly cancelled and they were barred from flights to the United States this month. But the students, most of whom were headed to schools in the University of California system, say their visas were revoked at the last minute without any warning or explanation. Most were prevented from boarding flights in Iran and others from boarding connecting flights in the Persian Gulf, and one person was detained at Boston Logan Airport and then turned back. Now, I hope this was done for the right reasons. I suspect not, and it's more of their stupid oil game war that benefits no one except the select few. Well, a lot of these foreign students, it doesn't matter which country they come from, are used in spy in and spy on tools and used as stooges for the CIA in their education for information game. And that's gone on since the 1950s, where CIA agents go into a country, make offers or threats to young people to become spies and get various kickbacks for doing so. I'll go deeper into that in a future show. A petition to remove All Lives Matter, which is as a decal from the rear quarter panels of 2 Frankton, Indiana Police Department vehicles, has resulted in the department agreeing to take them off, following complaints that the decals demean the Black Lives Matter movement. Do people think before they speak? Clearly not. Now, the petition was started by Franklin resident Molly Hobbs, who posted her reasoning for removing the decals from police vehicles on change.org, and the goal of the petition is to get the Frankton, Indiana Police to remove All Lives Matter from their patrol vehicles. Oh dear. Now, for those of you who don't know, Frankton, Indiana is a small farming town in the Midwest with not much diversity, and All Lives Matter was placed on the vehicles during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. And BLM brings attention to injustices against people of colour, mostly committed by police officers, according to their spokesperson. And the All Lives Matter group was created to silence and villainize people of colour's fight for justice, according to the spokesman for All Lives, against All Lives Matter. And this controversial slogan does not belong on the vehicles of those meant to protect and serve. I believe the slogan on the vehicles can give the wrong impression of the town, and I also believe removing this slogan will increase diversity and help diminish the negative racist stereotypes that rural Midwest towns receive. Really. Personally, I believe Molly Hobbs needs to be arrested for stereotyping and racism based on only one colour of people's lives matter. That's essentially what she's saying. And also wasting police and public time. Israeli Arab lawmakers have recommended that the former army chief Benny Gantz should become Prime Minister. I think certain overreaching elements, shall we say, in Israel have decided that despite losing the vote, Netanyahu will carry on as it stands. Last week's election put the incumbent leader Benjamin Netanyahu neck and neck with Mr. Gantz. No, he's not. He got less votes. And the two are now vying to build a governing coalition, which is a convenient term for let's delay things when things don't go our way. A bit like what's going on in America and Britain at the moment. Now, Joint List, the bloc of Arab parties that came in third, says it wants to oust Mr. Netanyahu from power. And this is the first time since 1992 that an Arab political group has issued an endorsement for the Prime Minister. And this was Israel's second general election this year, after the first in April. Coalition talks fell apart and a snap poll was cancelled, and that's what's going to happen with this one also, and there'll be a third, and meanwhile Nutty stays in charge. That's how it works. There was a report this week. Earth's magnetic field, the basis for modern global navigation systems, is constantly in some state of flux, according to the report. However, it now seems to be going haywire, pushing the North Pole closer to Siberia, and no one's sure why, according to the report. The field changes as the molten metals surrounding the Earth's solid iron core churn and flow, they say, creating electric currents and a corresponding magnetic field. As a result, the magnetic poles tend to shift slightly as a matter of course. However, researchers don't know what's causing the magnetic field to now move so quickly. The magnetic North Pole sped across the international dateline last year at a rate of 55 kilometres per year. Oops. 3 times faster than it moved in the mid-1990s. And now it's located in the Eastern Hemisphere. It's moving away from Canada and approaching Siberia. I wonder why. GHI listeners will know why, as we've been warning of it. So that's a nice little confirm there. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Tuesday announced a formal impeachment inquiry, no surprise there, into Donald Trump, which was quite a turnaround by the Democratic leader that sets up a constitutional and political clash which will pit the Congress against the nation's chief executive. And Pelosi said the actions of Trump presidency have revealed the dishonourable fact of the president's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Pelosi said that. Yet again, an example of accusing others of doing what they do. it's coming all so common that not only in political fields, in media fields and alt media. So she said, therefore today I'm announcing the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. Now, impeachment, for those outside of the US, is a rare and extraordinary first step that could lead to overturning the decision of US voters in 2016 to elect Trump. Now, in the backdrop of this, there was a poll in the past week that said 55% of Americans would support impeachment if it was confirmed that President Trump suspended military aid to the Ukraine in order to push the country's officials to investigate Mr. Biden. The gist of all this is it's all too predictable amount of distraction, and this is why this show has largely tried to, anyway, move away from politics. It's all BS, staged and drama-laden environment where no one acts on anything or discusses what they're supposed to do, like the policies. Does anyone debate the policies anymore? No. It's all about drama. You know, for me, they can impeach the whole lot of them, as all of them as a dereliction of duty to this country and its people. None of them discuss policies. It's all he said, she said, drama, investigations, anything but discuss the policies. And therein lies the problem. Now, the question is not whether Trump asked for dirt on Biden. The question is, why haven't the military, Pentagon, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the Department of Homeland Security not investigated whether Biden was a national security risk in the Ukraine? Oops. It's funny that you can find all kinds of misdemeanors in the alt media about Biden and his son, and yet the aforementioned groups do or say nothing. That's the real crime here. 6 or 7 major agencies, and not one of them is investigating on the grounds of national security, including Pelosi. Why isn't Pelosi, as the leader of the Democrats, investigated Biden as a potential national security risk and also a potential damaging aspect to her own party? No, it's all about covering up, you see. And the same distraction tactics are being used in the UK, from Brexit to now let's investigate the Prime Minister and who he goes on trips with, and whether he's sleeping with her or not. Who cares? Like I said 3 years ago, it's all a distraction, Brexit. Johnson, May and Cameron, none of them with a problem. It's the system, and too often people buy into it. And amidst all the noise of suspending Parliament in the UK for a few weeks over Brexit, and they're not allowed, they won't be able to discuss it for a month or so. What has been lost is the same people that wail, oh, we can't discuss Brexit for a month. I've had since April 2016 to make a plan, deal or decision, and failed. And no one's asking that. Why? What difference is an extra 3 or 4 weeks going to make from near 3.5 years? They're not going to come up with a plan because they never meant to come up with a plan. This is what people have to get about politics. It's fake. Something to ponder on in next year's elections in America. Trump will be 74. Biden will be aged 77, Warren 71, Sanders 79 and Pelosi 80. Should that age group be representing the country at the highest levels? '74, '77, '71, '79 and 80. President Jair Bolsonaro has insisted that the Brazilian areas of the Amazon rainforest are sovereign territory. It's not the only time the word sovereign was mentioned this week. Mr. Trump did it in the UN. And conservationists blame Mr. Bolsonaro and his government for turning a blind eye to farmers and loggers clearing the land in the Amazon, which is hastening deforestation. And he said it was a fallacy to describe the Amazon as the heritage of humanity and a misconception that its forests were the lungs of the world. He didn't say it that way when you're chopping down trees everywhere else. And Brazil is home to more than half of the Amazon rainforest. Now, I understand where they're coming from on both sides. Yet, should Mr. Bolsonaro listen to countries whose degradation in their own countries tell others what they should or shouldn't do? All kinds of countries telling Brazil, you can't do this and you can't do that. Global warming, climate change, where's all the trees? When they're not even doing it in their own countries. But one day it would be real nice if all countries shared resources and all contributed in protecting certain areas. Then we would have an adult world. Intel. Expect earthquakes and outages in varying fields over the coming days. Kashmir was not an earthquake. It is part of the war. Point 2. The other races below ground spent the weekend celebrating their independence from the SSP and their minions and cohorts last weekend through Monday. Several battles took place underground for varying reasons, and all went well. Now, the discourse which is ongoing is over us receiving some support in our battle to remove surface clouds. They not only hold us up, but them also. So we're looking for strategic support to deal with their threat in the near future. Point 3. 2 underground stations, which became 3, of rogue elements in the others were destroyed over the weekend. One contained an array of computers that was interfering in a variety of ways, and they were dealt with. Several Vril frequency interference machines operating from below the ground were also deleted globally. The Vril reptilian group lost many of their group also for interference with humanity and ignoring the peace treaty. The Vril group in particular are a major problem currently that we've been dealing with recently, with their frequency-based machines causing much havoc and disruption, particularly in the field of harvesting energy from selected groups. Work is underway to address those issues. There was a plan of theirs to collect tens of thousands of people and bring them to a certain region in America, give them jobs and funding so they can be used as batteries. Some people have a much higher frequency or essence they desire. That was prevented. Next piece. The gist of those below ground machines was to create a frequency that lowered the vibration of people on the planet, particularly certain groups who have turned their light frequency beacon on. Now, people may remember I did a piece that kind of disturbed some, asking was the planet and the planetary being sick? And I asked why so many species who came here all ended up being vampiric, violent, divisive and or chaos based, and I questioned whether grounding was a good thing, which again people didn't resonate too well with. Those machines are your answer to that question. They are, or in some cases were, infecting the ground with negative frequencies. And so that is another of the New Age based ideology of being barefooted on the earth has now come into question at this point. The old acupuncture was done in the feet for a reason. It has pressure points that goes to all parts of the body, and so they are receptors in one way. There's also what is called foot detox pads that draws out all of the toxins via the feet. But if it draws out from within, it also proves it can draw in from without. You understand where I'm going? For those that look for excuses for the masses, this technology is not it. For those who did their work and elevated their frequency, it becomes a mild to medium irritant. Those that haven't sink lower in vibration and frequency. You save you and two worlds all in one piece. And I will leave it up to you all to decide whether grounding is a good thing anymore. It's your choice. I just provide the information. But those machines below were penetrating from below and reducing the frequency. Last piece of intel before we have a couple of songs. I've told you, many believe it, that this show has more of the direct knowledge of what is and what has really gone on this planet. Our listeners are part of the few with the knowledge of the real control system for a start. The deep state are all bottom 5%. That's it. The alt media covers the bottom 25% maximum. And you've been told several things in our shows that the governments, heads of state and several other so-called high-profile groups are not privy to. Some people believe it and some people don't. If this next part doesn't hit home the levels of information you have, nothing will. Kim received a call from the Fed this week, and they spouted their usual drivel, needing money and leveraging it for the benefit of clowns. It's the general gist of it. Kim spoke back in truth. As she said, probably heard more bullshit stories than anyone else on the planet over the last 5 or 6 years as the trustee. She's heard every single bullshit story they and others have tried to feed her, and she spoke facts. Fact 1 to the Federal Reserve: you have no license and your contract expired in 2012. The response back was, we didn't know. Fact 2, you are owned by the Rothschilds. Response back was, we are not aware of that either. As of yesterday, the people who made that call from the Fed were approaching the Fed chairman, or whatever position he's in, Mr. Powell, to mention these bombshells. Seriously. I guess compartmentalisation is on steroids in that department. Either that or the memory wiped bots. Hey all, and welcome back. We're going to get into a plethora of op-eds, some of the pieces we mentioned earlier. But there was a piece we mentioned last September. This show warned Mr. Trump he was in deep trouble unless he acted on the several bodies of work that were done by the Manor World Holding Trust team, from sovereignty to tax reform to FEMA replacement or repurposing to fixing the Fed and the IRS, restoration of the military, and also how to fix the media, and the consequences of not delivering at least one of them soon will have far-reaching effects. Well, 1 year on, I suspect the consequences of failing to deliver of what is quite frankly, the best supporting package any US president has ever received. And a failure to act on that, I suspect, will now start the year of his downfall, unless actions are taken. You know, the Q movement is losing people in droves, bored by promises of this, that and the other, and none being delivered. Watch Comey go boom. No, he got a wrist slap. We're all, like they, are tired of the wait and nothing happening club on a political level. The people also, and the alt media in general. You know, those people who waited on promises will quickly turn against Trump now. Now somebody's impeached him. Not that it's going to make it through the Senate. It'll go through the House. But the problem is no one likes being fooled. And people tend to turn that being fooled into hating on something that they previously liked. It's the way it works. But Trump's in big trouble. And at this point, I can't, and this is my opinion, I can't see him being re-elected at this point. I just can't. And yet, delivery of one or two of those 6 or 7 proposals changes everything. You know, quite frankly, he wouldn't have to campaign. It would be guaranteed. So the question is it MAGA, MEGA, or we the people being made great again, Mr. Trump? because 3 years on, things do not look too pretty for you, the country, or the people. Following the news item of the sex education story in the UK, and given there's been thousands of teachers in many countries being charged with various inappropriate behaviour with children or students, the test pilot programme being run in the UK, mentioned earlier, should be alarming on many fronts. And by test, I mean they are gauging public reaction to it. That's what they're doing. If only a few complain, it will get ignored and rolled out into other regions. That's why they said it's going to go into 241 in one particular county in the UK. If there's no complaints, they'll just roll it out everywhere. So it is all parents' responsibility to make your opinion known that this is not acceptable. What this also states is a few things that should be determined by the parents. Demand to know which people, group or department came up with this suggestion initially as a proposal, and demand that they be fired and or investigated. Which group of people implemented this proposal and determined under whose authority they have to make that proposal, and demand that they are investigated and or fired. You know, there are various reasons why this is wrong to be teaching children this type of material at 6 years of age. In fact, in Holland it's 4. 1, have they asked the teachers whether they wish to do this level of teaching? 2, how will it make teachers feel if demanded to do this education system? 3, have you taken into account that many adults in the UK are terrified of being around other people's children in case they are deemed predatory? The culture is rampant with it. You know, I've seen lost children in a park and adults reluctant to help the child, as to be seen walking around anywhere in the UK with other people's children brings out the negative pointing fingers brigade. Has that been taken into consideration? No. 4, will there be a test on the subject? Is it interactive? You know, it's like you show me and I'll show yours. It's taken to a whole new level. You know, you imagine a child coming home late. Why are you home late, brother? I got detention, Mum, because I didn't wank off properly in class. Is that where we're heading? No, we won't go that far. It does, and it has, and it will. This is the key in all of this. By implementing this and carrying it out, they are saying that parents are incapable of talking to their own children about sex education. That's the better version. Or they're saying now openly, we own your children and we will do with them as we see fit. It's not good either way. And all parents have an obligation to speak out now, not just a few. Unbelievable. Next piece, in overview and balance, I would like to get people to consider and distinguish what people are offended by in comparison to what they are told to or expected to be offended by. And there are elements of society where this narrative, yet again, becomes contradictory, as we covered it in last week's show. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm in no way defending Mr. Trudeau, but I want people to look at things in a different manner. Mr. Trudeau has been slated for appearing as a black man in several photographs and videos and singing traditionally black man songs. But on viewing the photographs, it appears to be a fancy dress. And so what do people do in fancy dress? They dress up. You know, the fact that he dressed up as a black person, they suggest he is denigrating the black people. But what if he can sing like a black person? Has anybody asked? Which is maybe why he did it. No, they have led with that is wrong what he did. And that is called planting the seed. It's a program. So let's look at a few other examples to see if it's consistent. We had last year, or was it 2 years ago? It may even be longer now. Time flies. Prince Harry was slated as he went to a fancy dress as a Nazi brown shirt jacket and was condemned for doing so. And most people would agree that that was offensive, as the Nazis killed millions of people in World War II. But one has to ask, if that is the criteria for being offensive, why isn't the US military attire treated in the same way? The US military have killed multi-millions in 60 plus countries since World War II. What is the actual difference between the two? Then we have a whole genre in society who started out as one thing and then acted out as another, called transsexuals. Given most are male to female, I will focus on that. If a white man dresses up as a black man, it is offensive to black people. But if a man dresses up in women's clothes and acts as a woman, that is deemed as not being offensive to women. Why the discrepancy? You know, you can look for things everywhere to be offended. Women who come out of a shower, or the hairdressers with a towel wrapped over the head like a turban, and no one says a thing. Yet if the previous criteria for being offensive is equal, why is that not seen as being offensive to Muslims? See where I'm going? There's also a common prank that's done by all colours when adults are pranking their children or friends, the art of putting a white sheet over their bodies and scaring them as a ghost. But if we're using colours to define what is racist or not, why are all the sheets used to scare the children white? Surely in the above criteria, is that not denigrating and stating all white people are scary and ghosts? Again, it's contradictory. In the past, there was a derogatory term for white people. It was deemed racist, and yet it came from a completely unknown origin called honky. But if we're following their criteria, why isn't the term honky-tonk music being banned? Same thing, same word. You know, it's all about imitation, and that's the gist of what Mr. Trudeau did. There's people all over the world wear sports shirts of their favourite team and or player. Is that not imitating those groups or individuals? We had a plethora of white people in the early 2000s, like Eminem, doing traditional black music like rap and hip hop. In fact, we have one member in our group who's still doing it. Why isn't that deemed offensive if it's imitating the black culture? You know, why is it that some forms of imitation are deemed acceptable and yet other forms are not? That's where I'm going at with this. The problem is, if you look deep enough, you will always find something offensive in anything. And that's the problem. It's all low vibrational mindset thinking. It hasn't and won't solve a damn thing going forward. You know, I wonder why they haven't banned the circus yet. you know, because the lead performer in a circus looks like an elite globalist. Surely that's offensive to them, is it not? No, because they're too busy finding ways to damage us, whilst the majority of people scrabble around trying to find something offensive they can complain about. See the difference? Back in the UK, in the 1960s and 70s, there was a very popular show called the Black and White Minstrel Show. And 18 million people at its peak watched it, which was about a third of the country at the time. And yet I don't recall people believing that the singers were being racist because white people darkened their faces and sang largely black music. Now, I do recall some in that show were black people. Surely, if it was offensive, they wouldn't have participated. You know, as kids, we played another game, which would also now be deemed offensive. Cowboys and Indians. In this modern day, that would have to be renamed to Cowboys and Native Americans now. In case it offends some half-wit with too much time on their hands, if you ask me. But it all goes back is who decides what is offensive and what's not. And what has gone on over the past 20, 30 years is the establishment deciding this is offensive and that's not. And it's all leaning to one thing. I'll tell you who decides. Racist think tank groups running social engineering programs brought in early 1990s called political correctness. That's the gist of it, which has turned into low vibrational people being offended by everything is what. And the sadness is so many people buy into this rubbish. You know, out went the words spades, ladies, blackboard, ethnic, and a plethora of other words suddenly were all deemed offensive. Even the Spanish word for black, negro, became offensive. Coloured then became offensive. And even the word black now is deemed offensive. You know, at the current rate, we will all have a vocabulary of less than 1 to 200 words at the rate people are getting offended by. You know, and it's beyond ridiculous. And what this has actually done is denigrate the real racism issue that was done against the black people, particularly in America and Europe. You know, with the ridiculous segregation programs that encompass toilets, bars, buses, jobs, status. And this is turning all those atrocities that were committed against black people and turned it into what borders on ridicule. You know, those types of behaviours that were going on in America in the 40s, 50s and 60s and 70s are an abomination to humanity. And they must not be replicated by any colour going forward. But this word magic, taking offence at everything, has to stop. Making an issue of what Mr. Trudeau did near 30 years ago and turning it into something I'm all offended by it now. Why not back then? Is not doing the cause of black people or anybody else any favours whatsoever. Be aware of the programme, don't play the game. Where are we next? Here's a name many of you will never have heard of. Ben Zion Malachowski, born in 1910, died 2012. He was an Israeli historian and he served as a professor of history at Cornell University and was a scholar of Judaic history. And he was also an activist in the revisionist Zionism movement, who lobbied in the United States to support the creation of the Jewish state. Oops. Now, his field of expertise was the history of the Jews in Spain, and he was an editor of the Hebrew Encyclopedia and Zeev Jabotinsky, personal secretary. Now, Ben Zion Malachowski was born in Warsaw, in partitioned Poland, which was under Russian control, and he was married to Sarah Lurie and the writer and Zionist activist Nathan Malachowski. Now, Nathan was a rabbi who toured Europe and the United States making speeches supporting Zionism in the early 1900s, after Nathan took the family to Mandate Palestine Aliyah in 1920. Now, after living in Jaffa, Tel Aviv and Safed, the family then settled in Jerusalem. Ben Zion studied in the David Yellens Teachers Seminary and also the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And here's the kicker. It was common practice for Zionist immigrants at the time to adopt a Hebrew name. And so they changed the family name, and it was changed to Netanyahu. Ben Zion Malachowski, one of the Bolshevik Russian Jews, is the father of Benjamin Netanyahu. Interesting, he was born in Poland. And the Polish government is having a number of issues currently, and has also become a major player in the anti-Zionist movement following attempts by the Zionists to extort 300 billion out of Poland as compensation for the Holocaust. Yes, they're still fighting for funds. Now, that was in response after Poland published the Red Cross report on the Nazi concentration camps that claimed 271,301 people were killed in them, not 6 million. And remember, not all in the camps were Jewish. Final piece before we have a music break. There was a mass global public demonstration over the past week, with people given time off work and even children excused from school to attend the rallies, all in support of climate change, where a paid female child actress overtook a paid female adult actress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as the voice for the Portal people this week, attending the UN. A child actress that has connections to the Soros-funded, not George Soros, social engineering group, and also Antifa, which allegedly is anti-fascist or anti-Nazi. And yet the irony is she's from Sweden, who supported the Nazis in World War II. Oops. Irony is lost on those people, it seems. It's also out of Sweden, the scientist in the past week who's promoting cannibalism, as in cannibalism. Eat humans to combat climate change, he's stating. A beautiful country like Sweden that brought us ABBA, Agneta, even our own Perla, now reduced to playing the lead role in a globalist agenda. Eat people to combat climate change. Oh dear. And yet, doesn't the climate change every day? I woke up this morning and it was a frosty 40 degrees. But by mid-afternoon it was high 70s and sunny. So the climate changed from the morning to the afternoon. What's the problem? You know? But isn't it odd the authorities will allow that to happen? Kids to not go to school and support it. And yet parents are dragged in by the authorities if their child doesn't turn up without valid reason. And yes, the state just allowed children to take the day off. The same state that fines parents in Britain if the children go on vacation during school time. But it's okay when it's for the cause of the globalist agendas, it seems. Yeah, I wonder if they would allow children to go and campaign if the children found out that 49,000 of their own kind died each day and the children wanted to campaign for them. Oh no, doesn't fit the agenda. And then you've got parents too stupid to understand it is an agenda, a program designed to make them feel guilty and subsequently empty even more money out of their pockets to fund non-existent climate change programs. It's another slush fund, pure and simple. You know, I feel for the child. I imagine she thought it would be fun being popular and going on TV in the beginning. But like the child pageants in America, it no longer becomes fun for the kid, and it becomes a tool for the parents to elevate themselves at the child's expense. Because that's what's going on there. But people have taken to this child because she, in essence, is their hero. A beacon of their own non-responsibility. This appeals to non-sovereign people, as they feel she speaks for them. But she's also their patsy. And when this fails, like global warming failed, they will turn on her in a flash. That child is their get out of jail free card for people who wish to do nothing. Only follow someone they think is popular, regardless of the message. And the danger now is it will spawn many other parents now pushing their children into the limelight to become the new Greta. The adults who have done nothing follow this child, as they feel it unburdens their guilt of doing nothing and saying nothing. So they don't have to take responsibility for anything. And they're pushing their responsibility onto the child. It's a sad world when people are using children to negate their own responsibilities, whether the cause is valid or not. Parents dragging their children along to these type of think tank sponsored events is a worrying trend. The last time that happened, of using children as activists to push an agenda, triggered this group, did it not? Have we forgotten already? Oh my. Have we forgotten already? That was the Hitler Youth song. All the kids pushing the agenda. And she's the latest. They'll use others. Of course, the last one failed. Hogg. Trying to get rid of people's guns, so the establishment can then just go and kill people. Funny, aren't they? Perhaps not. Talking of climate change, there was a piece that came up this week about Antarctic sea ice. And how it's barely changed from where it was 100 years ago. Oops. That scientists have discovered after poring over the logbooks of the polar explorers Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton. Now, the experts were convinced that the ice at the South Pole had declined significantly since the 1950s. Which they feared was driven by man-made climate change. Yeah, right. But new analysis now suggests that conditions are virtually identical to when the Terra Nova and Endurance sailed to that continent in the early 1900s. Indicating that declines are part of a natural cycle and are not the result of global warming. Now, back in 2009, the man who made millions of talking shite, Al Gore, announced that there was a 75% chance that the entire North Polar ice cap during the summer months could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years. And the dates by which climate scientists and politicians said the ice would disappear have now all come and gone. I wonder why. While the ice has remained. Now, one problem that persists is that there's only a relatively short series of direct measurements on which to base the understanding of the Arctic, and satellite monitoring of the Arctic only began in 1978. So they're now saying, well, we've only got 40 years of reliable data. And they're now saying this may not be enough to establish what is normal or abnormal for the region. And yet we've got a global campaign stating we're all going to die and give us loads of money so you all don't die. Yeah. And it said, until the noise of a century of media hype and unscientific speculation about the Arctic has been removed from public debate, science will be unable to explain what, if anything, the signal from the Arctic is telling us. Now, what is fact is that the sea ice in the Antarctic has increased over the past 30 years. Yes, increased. Since satellite observations began. And scientists have been grappling to understand this trend in the context of global warming. You won't understand it because it's not real to begin with. So if ice levels were as low as a century ago as estimated in this research, then a similar increase may have occurred between then and the middle of the century, when previous studies suggest ice levels were far higher. Oops. I suggest Greta Thunberg does some of her own research before spouting globalist agendas. There are some regions that ice has receded. Some of the glaciers have receded. But what they're not telling you is there's more ice now than there was in 1999. Why? Because it's moved. Why? Because like the scientists who can't work out why the magnetic field is going a bit haywire, because the planet's moving. So where there was ice, even if you go on last year, the magnetic north, it's moved 55 kilometres, which is about 35-40 miles ish. So it moves with it. So does the ice. So there's more ice now collecting near Siberia than Canada. Common sense thinking, you would think. Except they have parameters that they have to work under, and they have to go along with the official narrative, or they lose their grants. That's how it works. That's why you'll never get any real sense out of a scientist who is beholden to a grant. You're going to get a load of figures now that's going to boggle your mind. This is the US government spending on every second. The US government spends $121,067 per second. Out of that, $52,162 is borrowed. The government spends $7,264,020 per minute, of which $3,129,756 is borrowed. The US government spends $435,841,200 per hour. Of that, $187,785,388 is borrowed per hour. The US government spends per day $10,460,188,800 per day. The US government borrows $4.5 billion per day. In a week, the US government spends 73,221,917,808 per week. The government borrows 31.5 million of that each week. Per month, the US government spends 318,167 million. Of that, 137 billion, 100 million is borrowed. The US government's projected budget for this year is 3,818 billion. Of that amount, 1,645 billion is borrowed money. No one in the world has as big of a salary as the US government. It's the highest salary in the world. And it still borrows roughly 40% of the money it spends. So roughly 1.5 trillion per year is borrowed at 10% from the Federal Reserve. Why? Because America doesn't collect the income tax. Oops. Now, I would imagine these figures will have shocked you. 121,000 per second, 7.25 million per minute, 36 million per hour, 10.5 billion per day, 73 million per week. $73 billion per week, sorry. And 318 billion per month. I imagine these figures will have shocked you at the staggering amounts that are spent and borrowed. Well, I'm going to shock you more, because these figures are not for 2019, but 2011. Oops. Unreal. Life in prisons. Thought I would cover this. Filled largely with people who under common or natural law would not be in there, as under the no harm, no victim crime rule. If there's no harm and no victim, there is no crime. But it's all designed to make people on the stock market rich, which is a bizarre concept in and of itself. We all thought only criminals made money off crimes, and yet hidden criminals in our midst make far more, and it's legal, it seems. The very fact that someone on this planet thought of making money off putting anyone in jail, proves how far sick this planet has become and the endless desire to make money at all costs. But let's look at how the prisons are run, shall we? It has an authoritarian structure, a dress code, an emphasis on silence and order, negative reinforcement, they all walk in lines, a loss of individual autonomy, abridged freedoms, no input in decision making, and set times for walking and eating in prison. And yet, curiously, those types of disciplines are not just applied in prisons either, are they? It's applied in a different type of prison, and it's every bit as controlling and mind debilitating, is it not? Called school. It has an authoritarian structure, a dress code, an emphasis on silence and order, negative reinforcement, all walk in lines, a loss of individual autonomy, abridged freedoms, no input in decision making, and set times for walking and eating. It's no different, is it? What have the children done wrong? You know, the progression of our species, the ultimate in creation, and we imprison them in small rooms with oversized classes. Again, just like a prison. With a teacher, because they have been educated and not taught, who doesn't know his or her ass from her elbow. But that's not the teacher's fault. I want to make that clear. It's the system. But what are we doing to the children? It's no different. Prison, school. School was a complete prison to me. But like I said, it's not the teacher's fault. Americans have been taught shite since the 1930s. Courtesy of the Ford Foundation and Carnegie. And when you get an American asking a Brit, which state is Pennsylvania in? Boy, do you realise how much this country's in trouble. And yes, that happened to me recently. What state is Pennsylvania in? An American. And it requires a radical overhaul. I know a current employed teacher who can't answer more than 3 out of 20 questions that was set to a 14-year-old doing a test exam in the 1880s. And you realise how far behind we really are. So I would welcome, one of the things I wanted to do with Randy and Alan is come up with a new curriculum for children that's going to teach them, not imprison them and repeat after me like bots. The world of learning the truth and being in the alt media brought in a plethora of money programs we mentioned recently to seduce people in, and none have delivered. They are by and large distractions to real learning, both of the self, the collective and the world. A world that's far more heinous and hideous than we all managed or imagined when we started off down the rabbit hole. Did you think you'd ever learn this much? That apart from encompassing the earth, spans both time and dimension, a seemingly endless cesspool of deceit, corruption, malfeasance, harvesting, vampirism, death and disease of the body and mind, largely enhanced by the experiment known as religion, who perfected the art of getting humans to seek outside of themselves, when, as many of you now know, all the answers and needs were within. But given Greta Thunberg's performance and the fear programs that have been played around the world globally, but even heavier in America, as this list attests to, from Nibiru, asteroids, Jade Helm 1 and 2, FEMA camps, 9/11, Agent Orange, Project Bluebeam, Y2K, World War III, the Zika virus, Ebola, H1N1, measles, school and mall shootings, Vegas shootings, California fires, floods everywhere, chemtrails, fluoride, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5G. And then you add in dire education, vaccines, pharma drugs, other drugs, products resembling food but aren't, red pilling, LSD, climate change, weather wars, mind control, spying everywhere, bent cops, politicians, justice system and agencies, failed governments, failed policies, banks and the Fed looting us, no American government, no constitution, no rights. And then you throw in agents, trolls and shills in our community, family and friends and loved ones, discarding us or ridiculing us. Record homeless, record prison population, divorce and foreclosures. And then on top of all that, you throw in sin eating on a massive scale. And you may all wonder how we all largely survived all of that. Most of which has happened in the last decade. So how did we survive? Because we're a lot tougher and resilient than most of you will give yourselves credit for is why. And too often the focus is on what we haven't done or got rather than what we have done and achieved. The 33 events piece I did in previous shows showed not only how far we have come, there's been more events since, but also how easily we forget our triumphs. People should ponder on that piece of how far you have come. Next piece, smart cities have been rearing its head and being promoted into the public and also into the alt media. Whilst parts of it has some benefits and validity, they've always got to throw pieces in. The gist of it is, if you boil it all down, the benefits of it are all based on one word, is it not? Convenience. And by now you should all realise that convenience has done much damage to us all. Smart cities are the Amazon World Hub technological world that is envisioned by the globalists. That's the gist of it. And the first stage into an all-electronic technological world where your every move, cough, sneeze, sexual act and conversation is scrutinised and turned into a database collection and used to monitor your everyday moves. If you think Big Brother is bad now, this will be 1,000 times worse. Nothing, and I mean nothing, will be sacred or private anymore. In essence, in that world, you become a sim character in a globalist game. Take your heart, take your blood pressure, take your heart pressure, because you'll have one of those Fitbits turned into something else. Fridges, Alexa machines, home security are all listening, recording and monitoring. Why? To tailor you for the future world. If they hear you speaking about, oh, I'd like a vacation, I'd like to go to Oregon, and suddenly it pops up on your screen. Have you not seen that yet? check out the series Continuum for further clues on that. It's all there. And if you think that technology is 5, 6 or 700 years in advance, think again. It's all in the past. Smart cities are like smartphones. They are a misnomer of epic proportions. And if you're going to be supporting smart cities, you're just not as smart as you thought. You know, there will be people who will like that concept. But I'll tell you now, it's not conducive to higher soul development beings. It's just not. Smart cities are for the lazy-minded, big brother, state-loving, non-sovereignty people who want everything done for them, and that's their choice. And we must accept that choice. But the question is, do you? The predicted issues, and I know this is prevalent to one or two of our members currently, of all types of relationships is really coming to the fore now. And painful decisions have and will be made. Letting go is often painful, particularly if you immerse yourself in the situation. Stepping away and analysing what have these people done or for me is the key. What value do these people in my life do they bring? Are they being nice? Do they care? Are they loyal? Is their baggage affecting my life? And do they actually care how your life is going? These are all questions that can only be answered by the individual in private, preferably in peace also. Your higher self will guide you to your choices. Now, it may not be what you want to hear, and you have to be prepared for that. But the fact that you ask the questions is all very indicative of what will be revealed. It's like people who ask me, is Kent Dunn valid? The person already knows Kent Dunn's not valid, otherwise they wouldn't ask the question. And people often worry, and I've heard this several times, including this week, and I do get it. Well, I have no one left if I leave behind who I engaged with. And yes, I get that all too well, having gone through it myself 6 years ago. In 1 month out went my wife, 2 kids, 3 grandchildren, the dog, and 7 or 8 couples who were all my friends in Florida. Essentially everyone who had become my family, as my original family are all 4,500 miles away. And all I had left was internet-based people, none of whom I had met face-to-face at that point. And yet, I not only survived that ordeal, but thrived. Those people were holding me back. They were dragging me down. The biggest problem is the fear of change. But the fear of change becomes your own prison. You know, you are a sovereign spirit and soul. So why would you create your own prison? We'll be back shortly. Hi all, and welcome back to the final portion of tonight's show. There's a lot of things I can't say currently. there's an awful lot going on all levels, and I mean all levels, in, on, above and outside. And over the past month, there's been an increase in support of the work that we've been doing. Not the low levels, which is politicians as yet, but certainly the higher levels. New groups have arrived. I won't be telling you who those groups are, but there is new groups that have arrived to support. There's a strong desire from several beings now to go a completely different way than what has gone before, where we all work together. The biggest stumbling block for all working together currently is humans. And for those who ask, as I'm bound to get the question again, why doesn't the council step in? And I'll repeat again, for the simple reason, it's humans against humans. If other beings interfere with other beings, then actions can and will be taken, which is what has happened in the past week or so. There's been a heavy bombardment of actions taken against those who harms others, not just humans either. And that will go on. The key is we have to get our act together, as mentioned in the last show. And should we do that with the support of the others that will help us in certain aspects, they're not going to fix it for us, then we have a golden opportunity going forward. And that's all it is. It's an opportunity. There's no guarantee that humanity will not replicate what the clowns have done. In fact, certain groups are convinced we will replicate it. Including the parents, or the former parents anyway. But a lot of the technology that's mentioned in certain parts of other parts of alt media, toplet bombs and plasma this and plasma that. The main plasma weapon was dealt with in November of 2014. And it involved a large facility on Long Island that suddenly went on fire, which was reported in the media. But what they don't tell you is what was destroyed below. That was the plasma weapon, and it went fairly high up on D levels. 8, as I understand it. And so this delays because we can't do this and we can't do that. Technological wise, has largely been negated for some of us who have gone beyond the timeline of 2014. A lot of the alt media just hasn't. They're stuck in the old time loop. That's why their information doesn't change. The RV's happening today, tomorrow, the next day. Pleiadians arriving this week, that week, next week. Just goes on and on. But giant strides have been made over the past month, which has pleased me no end. Some of the things that I've been asking for or working towards over 5 or 6 years now, to see them taking place fills me with great pride. To see former beings who hated one another suddenly working together is also a major source of pride and also inspiration to keep going. And yet we missed one key component: our own species. Too content and finding things to be offended by, and playing divide and conquer. One hopes the organic human souls rise to the occasion between now and the end of this year. Some listeners took part of last week's piece the wrong way when I pointed out the contradictory nature of religion as not believing in a God, which is not the case. I call it source. And yes, there is a source. And people can call it God or whatever they like. But the gist of it is there's a completely different narrative and meaning behind both words, which I will explain again in this piece. Anyone can become a God under its original meaning, not the current one. The original meaning of a God is a person or being who has attained higher soul growth. So if a person achieves the 7th earth, and earth isn't the name of our planet, earth just means an inhabited planet. If a person goes through the 7 earth-based levels of growth, they move on to the next 7 layers of growth of galactic, then universal, then you have the multiverse level and the metaverse level. Now I don't know at which exact level a person or being attains the level of a God. It may be the earth-based level. But what I do know is many of the ET and NT races who have not showed sufficient signs of soul level on the first level, never mind further out, have showed up here with advanced tech and declared themselves as God or gods. That is fact. So there's a distinct difference between source and God. One is the creator of everything. One is a person or being being created by source and has gone on to achieve higher soul development. Big difference. Now what I refuse to believe in is books. None of them. It has levels of contradictory violence, fear, incest, death, divide and conquer, and the Lord coming down to change the languages so humans can't communicate together. Yes, that's correct. See Generation ISIS for that, or better known as Genesis. And the message contained within them all that should make any rational thinking person question their validity. None of it makes any sense in a real God, higher developed soul growth, or source. None. So people can criticise me all you like on my opinion and knowledge over religion. But I would ask, on your next trip to your psychologist or doctor, please tell him or her you've just spoken to a snake. You just watched a bush go on fire and talk to you. You parted the Mississippi whilst walking across it, and that marrying and sleeping with your sister and mother is okay. Oh, and by the way, you threw your only children out of the house because they ate an apple. All whilst talking to a man who sits on a cloud spying on everyone that makes the CIA and the NSA look like a Fisher-Price spy kit. Oh, and by the way, all people not Jewish are shit under the shoe. And let's see where that gets you. You'll get rushed down to the mental facility. Now, that may sound humorous to some, and it does to me in some cases, but it's actually very sad, and those books, fake gods and the various religions, have been the cause of billions of deaths on this planet, and much suffering to many more, which people who participate in that program appear to be oblivious to. It was God's word. Not really. Religion was an experiment to see how far people would externalize everything about themselves, when everything needed was within. Let's look at it rationally. Neither God, Jesus, Allah, Kali Ma, Baphomet, the devil, the Lord, etc., not one of them wrote a book. None. Every single book was written by the control system and their minions, none of which, if you take away your blind faith, and it's called that for a reason, makes any sense whatsoever. And these are the questions people must ask themselves. I know it's all encompassing and it's an easy path to look for everything outside of yourself, but external is devolution. But your answers, truth, love, evolution and source all lie within. That is the real God, or source intended. Final piece tonight. The world of love. Too few really have it. Too few exhibit it, inward or outward. And too few wish to receive it, frightened by their own doubts, peer pressure, society norms, fears, rejection and insecurities. What will others think? Mastery of the self renders the last comment mute. It must fit into society norms of money difference, age difference, intelligence difference, colour difference, dress difference, religious difference, culture difference, gender difference, or just some of the boundaries life puts up as an excuse to not love a certain person or people. Why have we as a collective allowed those boundaries? Well, it's the system, Thomas. Yes, they created certain parameters of division, but we as a collective accepted them because we forgot to create our own. I'll repeat that again so it sticks. The system created certain parameters of division, but we as a collective accepted them because we forget to create our own. Therein lies the key, does it not? We forgot to create or be creative. The vessel, soul and spirit with the most creativity, and we allow the dark and their programs to subvert us into a loveless and non-caring society. Why have we allowed them to create our life and lives for us? Because we're too fucking lazy is why. And we have to stop it. A creator being that won't create. I mean, have you ever heard anything so ridiculous? A creator being that won't create allows others to create programs and ideas and ideologies for them. And yet we exhibit it daily. And all that is wrong in life is down to us not creating our paths and allowing them to create for us. To use an example, it was mentioned again this week, so I thought I'd throw it in. The $1 a week or month program I came up with is a prime example. But because they didn't create it for us and publicise it on their platforms, it was dismissed in emphatic mode of less than 5 participants. That won't work, Thomas. People think it's a scam. Life is a scam everywhere you look. And yet people buy into it. The lottery, which is another tax on the people. Just the Powerball and the Powerplay generate sales of tickets of around 10 to 12 million per week. Pulling in between 23 and 27 million a week. But how many really win? 1 person? 100? Might get some use out of it. And yet there was a programme, if all those lottery people of 10 to 12 million gave $1, not $2 a week like the lottery, we could all win. But that is a scam, they say. And this is why society is messed up. And the key ingredient missing is a lack of love. Why has society made it a weakness to love your fellow species? You know, many people love animals more than people. Why not love them the same? Well, people are nasty, Thomas, because they have allowed themselves to be that way. No one has to be nasty, disrespectful, hate-filled. They chose that path because they are weak and loveless. A mindset I've used several times in our shows plays a vast part in this also. The comparative and competitive mindset, where the goal of love is based on how much someone earns, their home, their car and materialistic items, so they can show off to their peers. But that's not love. That is vacuous vampirism, status-based and rubbing your friends and close circles nose in it of what you have and they don't. Why would we participate in making our friends envious or appear that they've got less? You know, it's all too easy to hate. The portal people do a great job getting Americans to hate on Russians, Chinese, Muslims and anyone who will not bow down to the cult of Ra country and their Zionist psychopaths. But behind those labels, there are many people that have not been bound into a narrative, who want the same as you. They want peace. They want a life free of war, free of the fear of war. They want love. They want their children to grow up in a better world. It's no different to you or I. Neglecting those facts means you haven't spent enough time to understand life, or the dance of the interconnectedness of living species here. It's all symbiotic. And this is why we have so many lines and defined patterns like triangles, squares, circles, hexagons, pentagrams, Mobius loops on this planet currently. They are all inorganic shapes, and all are closed systems. Oops. Nature does not create them shapes. It creates waves, spirals, snowflake patterns, all of which have open-ended patterns that allows for expansion and evolution, all of which are organic. Solving the world's ills will not be achieved targeting just the elites or hating other people online, most of which you've never met. It will only be solved by love, forgiveness and flexibility. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now. Keep a lookout for From Russia with Love 7. It'll probably be over the weekend. Bye.